The narrow, cobbled streets of Seville glowed under the warm evening light. Cafes spilled over with a chatter of locals and tourists alike, the scent of roasted almonds and jamon dancing in the air. Inside El Patio de la Reina, one of the city's most charming restaurants, I sat at a corner table by the window, my heart thudding with anticipation. Tonight was my 25th birthday. My boyfriend, Hugo, had insisted on taking me somewhere special. He'd chosen this romantic place weeks ago, claiming he wanted to make the night unforgettable. I wore the red dress he once said made my eyes look like fire. Silly me thought it might rekindle the warmth I hadn't felt from him in months. Hugo was late. I checked my phone for the third time. No messages. The waiter, kind and patient, offered me a complimentary glass of cava, sensing my unease. I smiled politely, trying not to seem abandoned. When Hugo finally arrived, nearly 40 minutes past our reservation, he didn't apologize. Instead, he laughed, adjusting his expensive jacket as he dropped into the seat opposite me. Sorry, I lost track of time. Alvaro and the lads caught me on the way here. I forced a smile. It's all right. I was starting to think you'd forgotten. He shrugged, waving down the waiter like he owned the place. I said I'd be here, didn't I? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced laughter and cold wine. Hugo scrolled through his phone between courses, responding to group chats, laughing at inside jokes I wasn't part of. I tried to stay cheerful. It was my birthday, after all. Then came the moment that changed everything. As dessert was served, flan for me, nothing for him. Hugo's phone buzzed again. He smirked, then turned the screen to show a photo to the table beside us. I recognized two of his friends, Nico and Javier, who had apparently just walked in and sat nearby. Hugo beckoned them over. They pulled up chairs without asking, speaking rapid Spanish I could barely follow. Nico glanced at me, grinned, and said something that made the table erupt in laughter. I didn't catch the words, but I saw their eyes flick to me. What's funny? I asked, my voice barely steady. Oh, nothing, Hugo said, waving a hand. They were just saying how brave I am. Brave? He looked at me with a smirk. For dating someone who's, well, not exactly a model. You know what I mean. The laughter that followed burned more than any insult. My cheeks flushed. I blinked, stunned. Are you serious right now? Oh, come on, Carino. It's just banter. Don't be so sensitive. I stood up, shaking. You brought me here for this? Hugo leaned back in his chair, nonchalant. You were never really my type, if I'm honest. I've just been keeping things going out of pity. Thought it was time to stop pretending. I left without another word. The sounds of laughter followed me out the door, down the street, and into the night. Seville, once so magical, now felt cruelly unfamiliar. The streets of Seville blurred beneath my hurried steps. My heels clacked against the stones as I walked without a destination, only a need to escape. The city that had once felt like a warm embrace now wrapped around me like a cold silence. I passed glowing windows filled with happy couples, laughter echoing from terraces, and music drifting from nearby flamenco bars. None of it reached me. I didn't cry.
Not yet.
I reached Plaza de España, its grandeur strangely comforting in the quiet of the night. The fountains whispered softly, and a few tourists still lingered by the arches, taking photos beneath the ornate tiled alcoves. I found an empty bench near the canal and sat, numb and hollow. My hands trembled in my lap. The red dress now felt like a mockery. I stared at the reflection of the crescent moon in the water when a voice broke the silence. Perdona. ¿Estás bien? I looked up. A man stood a few feet away, concerned eyes meeting mine. He was around my age, maybe a little older, with messy dark curls and a soft accent. Seeing I didn't answer, he quickly switched to English.
Sorry.
I mean, are you all right? I hesitated before nodding. Just a bad night. He offered a gentle smile. I thought so. You looked like someone trying very hard not to fall apart. I chuckled weakly, surprised by his honesty. He sat on the far end of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. I'm Mateo, he said. I was just walking home from work. What do you do? I asked, more to fill the silence than from real curiosity. I teach art at a local school. Not as glamorous as it sounds. It does sound a little glamorous, actually, I said, allowing myself a small smile. He tilted his head. Let me guess. Tourista? No, I said. I live here. Well, I did. I don't know anymore. Mateo raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Do you want to talk about it? I paused, unsure. Telling a complete stranger that my boyfriend had humiliated me on my birthday felt ridiculous. And yet, it felt safer than telling someone who knew me. He embarrassed me. Said cruel things. In front of his friends. Mateo's expression darkened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I kept going, surprising myself. It was my birthday. He brought me to a fancy place, let me sit alone for nearly an hour, then arrived with jokes at my expense. Called me a pity case. Mateo was silent for a moment. Then he said, he sounds like someone who's very good at hiding his own weaknesses behind arrogance. I looked at him, surprised. I've met people like that, he added. They shine in a crowd but fall to pieces in private. His voice was calm, but something in it told me he knew exactly what he was talking about. I sighed. I feel so stupid. You're not. You believed someone who didn't deserve it. That doesn't make you stupid. That makes you human. We sat in silence after that, watching the lights shimmer on the water. It was peaceful, oddly comforting. Eventually, Mateo stood. I'm heading this way. Would you like me to walk you home? I hesitated. I think I need to walk a bit more on my own. Clear my head. He nodded, then pulled a small card from his pocket. This is the school where I teach. If you ever want to see some art, or just talk, you'll find me there. I took the card. Thank you. As he walked away, I looked down at the simple print. Mateo Rivera. Escuela de Artes de Triana. For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of warmth return. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning, sunlight crept across the tiled floor of my flat in the Alameda district, warm and indifferent to the wreckage inside me. I stared at the ceiling from my place on the sofa, still in yesterday's dress. The mascara smudges beneath my eyes told their own story, one I had no energy to erase. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. One message. From Hugo. You left in a strop. Don't be dramatic. I'll come by later if you want to talk like adults. I stared at the screen, then locked it without replying. Talk like adults? After what he did? A knot twisted in my stomach. Hugo had always been like this, charismatic in public, sharp and condescending behind closed doors. He'd chip away at my confidence slowly, then pretend nothing had happened. I used to think I was too sensitive. That maybe love meant compromise. But last night wasn't compromise. It was cruelty. I needed air. After a quick shower and coffee I barely tasted, I slipped into jeans and a jumper and left the flat. The streets were busier now, students, elderly neighbors, tourists, all bustling through the maze of Seville's charm. I walked aimlessly, ending up near the Guadalquivir River. The water sparkled beneath the sun, and I paused by the railing, breathing in the crisp morning air. Out of habit, my hand found the card in my coat pocket. Mateo Rivera. Escuela de Artes de Triana. I hadn't planned to visit, but something about his quiet presence last night lingered in my mind. Without thinking too much, I headed in the direction of the school. It was tucked away on a quiet street lined with orange trees, the white facade splashed with murals painted by students. Inside, the scent of paint and turpentine clung to the air. A receptionist looked up from her desk. Hola, can I help you? I'm looking for Mateo Rivera. She smiled. He's in the upstairs studio. Go through the courtyard and up the stairs. I followed the sound of low music and soft laughter to a sunlit room filled with easels and half-finished canvases. Students moved around casually, brushes in hand, chatting and working. Mateo stood at the far end, helping a young woman adjust the angle of her drawing. He spotted me almost instantly. Hey, he said, wiping his hands on a paint-smeared cloth. You found the place. I nodded. I wasn't sure I would, but here I am. He gestured toward an empty stool near the window.
Sit.
I was just finishing up the morning class. As the students filtered out, some giving me curious glances, Mateo pulled up a chair beside me. "You all right?" he asked. I hesitated. "Not really, but better than last night." "That's something." We sat in silence for a moment before I asked, "Do you always help lost strangers in the middle of the night?" He grinned. "Only the ones who look like they're about to set fire to their lives." I laughed despite myself. He stood and crossed to a canvas leaning against the wall. "I was working on something. Want to see?" I followed him, curious. The painting was abstract, full of bold lines and shadows. There was something chaotic in the composition, layers of movement and emotion, but it wasn't messy. It was honest. "It's beautiful," I said. "It's not finished, but I like the mess. Makes it real." I glanced at him. "Is that how you see life?" He shrugged. "Sometimes. People pretend everything needs to be tidy. But the best parts of us, they're usually a bit broken. Raw." His words sat with me longer than I expected. I stayed at the studio for over an hour, talking, watching him paint, sipping tea from a chipped mug. It felt strange, being seen without judgment, without someone trying to fix me or tell me what I'd done wrong. When I finally stood to leave, he didn't ask when I'd be back. He simply said, "Take care of yourself. And if you ever need a quiet place to breathe, you're welcome here." I nodded, clutching my coat. "Gracias, Mateo." He smiled, but there was something else behind it. Something watchful, like he already knew the road I was about to walk wasn't over yet. And he was right, because by the time I reached my flat, Hugo was waiting at the door. Hugo leaned against my front door, arms crossed, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the chipped paint behind him. His phone was in one hand, his eyes locked on the screen until he noticed me approach. "There you are," he said, sliding the phone into his pocket. "You weren't answering." "I didn't feel like talking," I replied flatly, stopping a few feet away. "You shouldn't be here." He raised an eyebrow, as if amused by my defiance. "Come on, Clara. Don't be ridiculous. We had a fight. Couples fight. You left before we even talked things through." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, heart pounding. "You embarrass me in front of your friends. You called me pathetic. That's not a fight. That's cruelty." Hugo scoffed, stepping forward. "You're being dramatic again. I was making a joke, all right? It got out of hand. I didn't mean it." I flinched slightly as he moved closer, his cologne stifling. The same scent that used to make me feel safe now made my skin crawl. "Please move," I said, voice low. He didn't. "Let's go inside. Talk like adults, like I said. I brought your favorite croissants from that bakery in Santa Justa. I don't want your apologies wrapped in pastries." He blinked, the charm slipping. "So what, this is it? You're throwing away 5 years over one night?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I think I've been throwing myself away piece by piece for the last 5 years. And last night, I finally realized it." A flicker of something dark passed over his face. "You've met someone, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He laughed bitterly. "Of course. Someone new, and suddenly you grow a spine. That's what this is." "No, Hugo. This is me realizing I deserve better than being diminished every time you feel insecure." For a moment, he just stood there, his breath shallow. Then he turned, as if dismissing me with his body. "You'll regret this," he muttered, walking away without looking back. I stood in the hallway, shaking. When the echo of his footsteps finally faded, I exhaled deeply, fumbling with my keys. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, my legs weak. It had taken everything in me to stand up to him. But even as I trembled, I felt something shift. Something settle. That evening, I returned to Mateo's studio. The sun was setting as I entered. He looked up from a canvas and gave me a nod, not surprised. Like he'd expected me. "I said you were welcome," he said gently. I smiled, this time without the weight of apology. We talked about art and music and small things that felt like a lifeline. At one point, I asked him, "Do you think it's possible to become someone completely different?" Mateo tilted his head thoughtfully. Not completely. But I think you can remember who you were before the world told you who to be. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling once more. But this time, it wasn't with dread. It was with anticipation. The past had claws, yes. But I was no longer willing to let it drag me back. And somewhere in the quiet corners of Seville, a version of me I'd long forgotten was waking up. It had been over a week since Hugo last appeared. No calls. No texts. No unexpected knocks on the door. The silence was eerie at first, like the calm before a storm. But I embraced it. Every morning, without his voice echoing through my flat, was a small victory. Mateo and I continued to meet. Sometimes at his studio. Sometimes in little cafes tucked away in narrow alleyways near La Macarena. He never pressed me for details, never demanded explanations. He simply listened, offering the kind of presence I hadn't known I needed. One afternoon, I arrived at the studio to find it unusually still. The smell of turpentine hung in the air, mingling with the soft strains of a Spanish guitar track playing in the background. Mateo was sketching in a large notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you working on?" I asked, slipping off my jacket. He turned the notebook around and showed me a pencil drawing. It was a woman, her back to the viewer, standing barefoot in a shallow river, looking out toward a blurred horizon. "It's not finished," he said, "but it's something I've been thinking about." "She looks lost," I murmured.
She's not, he replied.
"She's just deciding where to go next." I didn't know how to respond. I stared at the page, strangely moved. "Clara," he said softly, "you know you don't owe anyone your past, right? You don't have to explain it away." I nodded, feeling tears threaten. "I know, but sometimes it still owns me." He reached over and gently took my hand. "Let it go, piece by piece. Just like you lost it." That evening, I walked home with a strange lightness in my chest. But the next morning, the storm I'd been dreading arrived. I was in the middle of hanging laundry on the tiny balcony when my phone buzzed. A message from Lucia, a mutual friend I hadn't spoken to in months. "Just a heads up. Hugo's saying you've had a breakdown. He's telling people you've become unstable and you're having an affair with some random painter." My stomach dropped. I called her immediately. "He's making a scene at every brunch, Clara," Lucia said. "He's spinning the whole thing. Saying you ran off because you couldn't handle being a wife, that you're off the rails." I didn't believe it, of course, but people are talking. I ended the call and sat on the edge of my bed, hands shaking. It was exactly the kind of move Hugo would make, undermine me quietly, socially, so that by the time I protested, I'd seem paranoid. Unhinged. I opened my messages and scrolled, staring at his name. I thought about confronting him, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. He didn't want truth. He wanted control. I needed to be smarter. Over the next few days, I began gathering my things from the shared flat we used to live in. I arranged to go when he was at work, timing everything down to the minute. I took only what was mine, nothing more. In the process, I found things I'd forgotten. A journal from university, a box of old sketches, even a flyer for my first art exhibition. I sat on the floor with them, surrounded by fragments of who I had once been. One sketch caught my eye. It was of a woman sitting on a chair, arms wrapped around her knees, gaze hidden. I didn't even remember drawing it, but I recognized her. I had lived as her for too long. I packed it carefully and left the flat without looking back. Later that night, I showed it to Mateo. He studied it for a long moment before speaking. "She looks like she's about to unfold," he said. "Like a flower in the wrong season." I didn't know if I was ready to bloom again, but I did know I wasn't going to wilt for anyone anymore. The gossip spread like wildfire. By the time the second week rolled in, acquaintances who had once smiled at me across tapas bars now whispered behind their wine glasses. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Sevilla, as enchanting as it was, could be a suffocating echo chamber. At first, I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in painting, in walks through Parque de Maria Luisa, in long, gentle silences with Mateo. But every so often, I'd catch a glance, hear a laugh too sharp, or see a message left unanswered. The damage was being done behind closed doors. Hugo was winning. Not in truth, but in perception. And that was his speciality. One evening, I received an invitation to a gallery opening. It was for a former colleague's debut exhibition, a friend from when I still curated part-time for local artists. I debated not going, but something inside me hardened. I would not disappear. I wore a black linen dress, simple and stark, and pulled my hair back. I met Matteo outside the gallery. He looked at me as though I'd stepped out of a dream. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I do," I replied. "For me." We walked in together, my arm tucked into his. The room buzzed with Sevilla's elite art crowd, stylists, critics, professors, patrons. As we moved through the space, I felt the glances. Some curious, some pitying, some sharp with judgment. And then I saw Hugo. He stood across the gallery, wine glass in hand, leaning in too closely to a woman I recognized as a lifestyle blogger. He spotted me, smiled like a politician, and began making his way over. "Don't let him bait you," Matteo murmured. "I won't." Hugo reached us with the casual arrogance of a man who still believed he controlled the script. "Clara," he said, his tone laced with theatrical surprise. "You're out. And with company." Matteo nodded, civil but firm. "Evening." Hugo barely glanced at him. His eyes were on me, scanning, calculating. "You look well, considering." "Considering what?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Oh, just everything." He chuckled, then added with false warmth, "Everyone's been so worried. You've been hard to reach." I smiled. "Funny. I don't recall asking to be found." His expression flickered. "Just a fraction." But I saw it. The mask slipped. "I've heard stories," he went on, "about your new direction." I tilted my head. "If you're referring to the rumors you've been spreading, don't bother. The people who matter know better." Hugo's lips twitched into something resembling a grin. "Ah, Clara. Always dramatic." "And you," I replied, stepping closer, "always scared of a woman who no longer fears you." Silence stretched between us. He hadn't expected me to fight back, certainly not in public. Before he could reply, I turned to Matteo. "Shall we?" We left Hugo standing there, frozen in his performance, no longer the star of his own stage. Outside, the evening air was crisp and electric. I exhaled, as though I'd been holding my breath for months. "I didn't mean to make a scene," I said. "You didn't," Matteo replied. "You reclaimed your voice." As we walked under the amber lights of the old town, I realized something. Hugo's power had always relied on my silence, and I had finally begun to speak. The days that followed were quieter, more peaceful, perhaps, but laden with an unspoken tension. Hugo had become a ghost in my life, his whispers and insinuations lingering in the shadows of my thoughts. It wasn't that I was afraid, no, far from it. But there was something unsettling about knowing someone so intimately could turn so easily into a stranger. Matteo and I fell into a rhythm of sorts. There were dinners in quiet corners of cafes, walks along the river, late-night talks about everything and nothing. I started to realize that the space I'd once occupied, the one shared with Hugo, was now occupied by something new, by someone who, even in his silence, understood me more deeply than I'd ever expected. Yet, despite the calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that Hugo wasn't done with me. He wasn't the type to let things end neatly. One afternoon, as I was working in my studio, painting the cool blue sky above the rooftops of Sevilla, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Clara, we need to talk." I stared at the screen, my heart briefly skipping. It was from Hugo. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I looked out of the window, watching the sunlight shift and fade over the city. Something told me I wasn't going to be able to avoid him forever. Later that evening, after a long walk to clear my mind, I called him. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Clara." There was a coldness to his voice, a controlled kind of calm that made my skin prickle. "I don't want to do this," I said. "You've made your choice, and so have I." Yes," Hugo said with a dark laugh. "You've found someone new." How typical. I didn't flinch. "It's not about him, Hugo. It's about me. It's about finally being free of you." Silence stretched for a moment. Then Hugo spoke again, his tone lower now, almost softer. "You think you've won, don't you?" "No," I said. "I don't think I've won. I think I've finally started living." There was a long pause. The silence between us wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with the understanding that what we'd once had truly died. "Clara," he began again, this time almost regretfully, "I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't have to," I replied, my voice steady. "You just did." He didn't respond right away. Instead, there was a soft, almost inaudible sigh. "I don't know what else to say." "Then don't say anything." I ended the call. I felt a strange sense of closure in the act. Not that it was over, not truly, but in that moment, it was the first time in a long time that I had truly felt in control of my life again. That night, as I sat alone in my studio, the weight of everything began to lift. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe. For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. The days that followed felt like a delicate balance. It was as if I were walking on a tightrope, suspended between the old and the new, between what had been and what could be. My relationship with Matteo was blossoming, but I couldn't ignore the lingering shadow of Hugo. Though I had told myself that I was free, deep down, I knew this was far from over. It wasn't long before I saw him again. I had been visiting a local gallery, something I did to clear my mind after a long day of painting. As I wandered through the exhibit, my eyes caught a familiar figure standing by one of the paintings. It was Hugo. He hadn't seen me yet. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. I wasn't ready to face him again, not yet. But there was something in the way he stood, alone among the paintings, that tugged at me. Maybe it was the way his back was turned, or the melancholy air he exuded, but a strange mix of curiosity and old affection pulled me toward him. I approached cautiously, and when I was close enough, I spoke his name. "Hugo." He turned, his eyes immediately scanning mine. There was no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet sadness. His face softened when he saw me, but there was no warmth in his gaze. Only a kind of resignation. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice steady, though I could hear the edge of something beneath it. "I come here sometimes," I replied, trying to keep my voice even, my hands clenched at my sides. There was a moment of silence between us, the weight of our past hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. "I've been thinking about you," Hugo said finally. His words were slow, deliberate. "About what happened." I couldn't tell if he was genuinely remorseful or if this was just another of his attempts to pull me back into his orbit. "Do you think you can change it?" I asked. The words came out sharper than I intended. "Do you think I can just forget everything?" He looked away, his gaze drifting to the painting behind him. "I never wanted to hurt you, Clara. I know I did, but it wasn't intentional." "But you did it anyway," I replied, my voice quieter now. "And that's what matters." For a moment, he didn't say anything. He simply stared at me, as though searching for something in my face, in my words. Something he hadn't found before. "I miss you," he finally said, almost in a whisper. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, but I quickly pushed it aside. "It's too late for that, Hugo." He didn't respond. Instead, he just stood there, staring at me, his eyes filled with so many emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. "I think you should go," I said softly. "I think we're both better off that way." Hugo's lips parted as if to say something else, but he hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I understand," he murmured. As he turned to leave, I watched him go, the weight of his absence pressing down on me. For a moment, I thought I might feel relief, but instead, there was only emptiness. It wasn't until he disappeared from view that I realized how much I'd been holding on to, how much of him, of us, I had carried with me even when I thought I'd let go. I turned back to the painting, but it didn't offer me the comfort I needed. Not today. The weeks that followed Hugo's departure were quiet, almost too quiet. There was a stillness in my life that both comforted and unsettled me. I spent my days working on my art, pouring myself into my paintings as if each brushstroke could erase the past. But every so often, when the world slowed down, when I allowed myself to pause, memories of Hugo would resurface, uninvited. And then there was Mateo. I couldn't deny the growing connection between us. His warmth, his attention to detail, his gentle care, all of it felt like a balm to the wounds Hugo had left behind. Yet, I couldn't help but feel torn. Was I ready to give my heart to someone new? To let go of the ghost of a past that had yet to fully release me? One evening, as I was sipping my tea in my studio, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, my heart skipped a beat. My first thought was of Hugo, but I quickly pushed that thought aside. I opened the door cautiously, and to my surprise, standing there was Mateo. "Clara, I need to talk to you," he said, his expression serious. "Of course, come in," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. My heart began to race. Something about the way he said it, the urgency in his voice, made me feel as though something important was about to unfold. He sat down on the couch, his eyes not meeting mine at first. He looked troubled, as though he were struggling with something inside. I sat across from him, trying to steady my breath, my thoughts. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm not sure," he said, finally looking up. "Clara, there's something you need to know about me." I waited, my pulse quickening, as he hesitated, as though weighing his words carefully. "I'm not who you think I am," he continued, his voice low. "There's something in my past I've been keeping from you, something that could change everything." The words hit me like a cold wave. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. What could he possibly mean? Mateo had always been kind to me, so generous with his affection. What was it he hadn't shared? "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I never meant to lie to you, Clara, but there's a reason I came to Spain. A reason I got close to you." I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, and whatever truth he was about to reveal could either shatter me or set me free. "The truth is," Mateo continued, his gaze steady now, "I was sent here by Hugo." The words struck like lightning. I froze, unable to speak, unable to breathe.
"What?"
I whispered, my voice trembling. "I didn't know at first," he said quickly. "I didn't know until it was too late. But Hugo found out I was in Spain, and he asked me to keep an eye on you, to make sure you were okay." I felt like the world had turned upside down. Hugo? He had been the one to send Mateo to me? "I didn't want to betray you," Mateo said, his voice tinged with regret. "But as I got to know you, as I spent more time with you, I started to care about you. And I didn't know how to undo what I'd already agreed to do." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Every word he spoke seemed to tear at the fabric of my understanding of everything that had happened between us. The man I thought I was falling for, the one who had been my solace in the wake of Hugo's betrayal, had been sent by the very person who had hurt me. I stood up abruptly, my heart pounding in my ears. "How could you?" I whispered, shaking my head, the weight of his confession pressing down on me. "I never wanted to hurt you," Mateo said, standing as well. "I thought it was a small thing, just keeping watch. But I know now it was wrong. I'm so sorry, Clara." For a long moment, we stood in silence, the distance between us widening with every passing second. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run away from it all. But instead, I just stood there, numb, as the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. Everything had changed. The days after Mateo's confession felt like a blur. I barely left my apartment, my thoughts a swirling storm of confusion, anger, and betrayal. I couldn't understand how Hugo, the man I had once trusted with my heart, could have orchestrated such a scheme. And Mateo, despite his sincerity and remorse, had been part of it all along. The weight of the revelation was suffocating, and I found it hard to breathe, let alone think clearly. But as the days wore on, something inside me began to shift. The shock and anger started to fade, replaced by a deep, burning question. Why had Hugo done this? Why had he gone to such lengths to hurt me? I realized, in those quiet moments when I wasn't consumed by the noise of my own emotions, that I had never fully understood the reasons behind Hugo's departure. His betrayal had felt like an explosion, sudden and devastating, but there had to be more to it than just a change of heart. Something had driven him to take that drastic step, something I had missed in the years we had spent together. And then I thought about Matteo. Despite his role in the scheme, he had been nothing but kind to me. He had never meant to hurt me. In fact, he had been caught in a web of deceit that was beyond his control. I couldn't ignore the bond that had grown between us, nor the compassion he had shown. He had been my anchor during some of the most difficult moments of my life, even if his presence had initially been a product of Hugo's manipulation. After several days of soul-searching, I reached a conclusion. I couldn't hold onto the past forever. Hugo's actions, Matteo's involvement, none of it could define my future. I had to let go. I had to choose my own path. And so I made a decision. I walked to the little cafe down the street, the one where I had first met Matteo. My heart was heavy, but there was a sense of clarity now, a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. When I walked inside, I saw Matteo sitting at a corner table, waiting for me. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, both of us silently acknowledging the storm that had passed between us. "Clara," Matteo said softly as I approached, standing up. I sat down across from him, my hands clasped together on the table. "Matteo," I began, my voice steady, though my heart was still racing. "I've thought a lot about everything. About Hugo, about you, about what all of this means." He nodded, his expression full of apprehension. "And I can't change what's happened," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "But I can choose what happens next. I've been stuck in the past, in a place of hurt and confusion. And I don't want to stay there anymore." I could see the tension in Matteo's shoulders relax, as though a weight had been lifted from him as well. "I don't know what the future holds," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But I want to move forward, and I want to do that with you." His eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of hope there, something that mirrored the feelings that had been growing in me for weeks. "I'm willing to take that chance," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "To start over. If you are." I smiled, a small but genuine smile, and reached across the table to take his hand. "I am," I said. "I am." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. Free from the chains of the past, free from the lies and betrayals that had held me captive. It wasn't going to be easy. There would still be moments of doubt, moments when the memories of Hugo and everything he had put me through would resurface. But I knew, in that moment, that I was strong enough to face them. Together, Matteo and I would write a new story, one that was ours to tell. And I would learn, with every step, to trust again, not just in him, but in myself. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape.